morning to Miss Green's science class in Tuttle Elementary, Sarasota. I'm Captain Planet, and I was asked to answer a few questions for you guys. The first one is, what is red tide? Red tide is associated with an algae known as K. brevis. Now, this algae produces a pinkish to red pigmentation, and that's why we call it the red tide. Now, red tide has been known since the 1700s. It is very natural. It occurs about 40 miles off of the Gulf of Mexico. However, it's getting worse through the years because we're finding that our nutrient-rich coastlines may be actually feeding that red tide with nitrates and phosphates. Will it ever go away? It certainly should, and we're doing a lot of things to speed up that process. In the past, red tides would sometimes last 2 to 3, maybe 4 or 5 days, sometimes even a month. In 2016, it lasted 18 months. We're now coming up on a year of this red tide, which that tells me as a scientist that things are changing. What is changing? Climate change, global warming, the way that we are living our lives, the way that we are continuing to farm as global warming increases. Now, what is the blue-green algae? Now, blue-green algae, we're actually talking about cyanobacteria. Now, this is actually multiple organisms of bacteria that produce a greenish pigmentation to bluish pigmentation, and we refer to them as blue-green algae. Now, you guys have probably been hearing quite a bit about blue-green algae from Lake Okeechobee. Now, Lake Okeechobee is a very, very, very big lake. I believe it's about 720 square miles. So this sucker is a big, big lake, and it's shallow. It's very shallow. I think it's only about 17 feet deep in most places, in the deepest places. So when Hurricane Irma came along, it affected that lake, meaning it stirred up the water column. So nitrates and phosphates that come from our fertilizers when we farm or when we use fertilizer on our lawns or for cattle, now those nitrates and phosphates settle at the bottom of the lake. Now when the hurricanes come and a storm comes, it mixes that water, especially when it's a big shallow lake. Now when it mixes that water, the cyanobacteria already exist in the water. However, when nitrates and phosphates are suspended through the water column, it allows it to be a food access. Now, the cyanobacteria's limiting factors are nitrates and phosphates, meaning it's photosynthetic, yes, it needs sunlight, but that's not the limiting factor, meaning how big the bloom gets is controlled on how much food access there is, meaning nitrogen and the phosphorus. Now, the food is not just sunlight. Just like with our plants, you guys hear the word fertilizer quite a bit. Now, plants, they drink water like we do, but they don't eat hot dogs like we do, right? Now, plants do take vitamins like we do, like Flintstone vitamins, but us adults call it fertilizer. Now, when that fertilizer doesn't get soaked up all the way into the plant and it leaks through the soil into our water, that's what we call leaching. So the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae, is a result from fertilizer leaching and nutrient pollution. So nutrients are a good thing, but when you have too much of them, it's a source of pollution. I guess the next question was what causes it, but I answered that one too, huh? The last question's, what can we do better in environmental living to prevent these kind of things? That's my favorite question to answer right there, kids. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Also refuse and repair. Refuse to buy those plastic products. Start talking to your parents about how bad those grocery bags are. Those little grocery bags, that's what my sea turtle friends think are jellyfish. And when they eat them, they usually end up getting intestinal blockage and they end up becoming what we call floaters, meaning they're not able to dive and get their food because they have gas built up in them. It results in bad things. So all of this, whether how we landscape our lawns, how the food that we eat, we need to talk to our parents about eating organic and eating healthy, eating local, and eating seasonal. Meaning you eat papayas when papayas are in season, so they don't have to bring them from another country and put emissions out. If we can slow down the ways that we eat and eat less meat, then we'll do better, because we won't need all that fertilizer that's getting leached into our soils. We also need education, guys. Like Captain Planet always says, knowledge is power. You know, I'm big and strong, but my weapon has always been my mind. You don't need to fight when you're smart. If you study and you stay focused, that's how you're going to always reach your goals, guys. So I hope I get to meet you kids in person, and we can talk a little bit more about the everyday things that we can do, guys. Whether that be talking to our parents about recycling, talking about eco-friendly products, talking about maybe eating meat every other day instead of every day. Whatever we can do, parents will listen to you. You guys are smart, and they know that. Love you guys. We'll see ya.